he's just, you can't dislike him. He had the best smile in the world, the best smile. He would smile at you and, you know, you'd just like, you'd want to hug him.
Yeah.
And he always remained, he still is a fan of music and other musicians.
Yeah.
He's a huge fan. And I think that people got the sense of him that he's very genuine when he says, I love you.
It was quiet in the Osbourne home that afternoon, the kind of song with a distant hum of music bleeding through closed doors. But now, silence seemed to fill every inch of the place, heavy and strange. She had been tidying without thinking, moving from room to room as if keeping herself in motion could keep the ache away. In the corner of the bedroom, half hidden under a stack of old magazines, she found it, glass hinge barely holding on, and it had been his for years. He never let anyone touch it, even Sharon. Inside, he kept a strange assortment of trinkets only he understood, mismatched rings, bits of chain pending from fans, guitar picks worn smooth, a piece of paper. Her hands paused in midair.
Sharon is like my soulmate. Sometimes I love her, sometimes I don't love her, sometimes I'm angry with her. Sometimes I'm crazy about her. Sometimes I'm very jealous of her. Sometimes I want to fucking kill her. But through it all, at the end of the day, I love her more than anything in the world. Put it this way, I couldn't live without her. I don't want to live without her. And my love for her now is bigger than it ever has been.
Ozzy wasn't much for writing letters. If he had something to say, he usually just said it, or shouted it, or sang it. But this was deliberate. The paper was worn, edges yellowed, as if he'd carried it around for years before tucking it away. She unfolded it slowly, and the words stared back at her, messy and crooked in that unmistakable handwriting. Sharon, I know I've been a right pain in the arse. I know I broke things, broke promises, broke your heart more times than I can count. I'm sorry. You saved me from myself over and over, and I still wandered off into the dark. But every time, I found my way back cause of you. You're my girl, even when I didn't deserve you. If I go first, don't cry too long, love. Just remember, you're the only reason I made it this far. You're the best thing I ever had. Love you, Oz. She stared at the words, her throat tightening until she could hardly breathe. It was a kind of note you don't plan, the kind you write in a moment of rare clarity, when life feels fragile and the truth suddenly matters more than pride. She pressed it against her chest, tears blurring her vision. She knew that voice. She could hear him saying it, in that rough Birmingham drawl, half mumbling, half choking on his own emotion. And in an instant, the years rolled back. She was back in the early days, before the TV shows, back in Skin, in public. People called him a madman or Prince of Darkness, but Sharon knew the truth. Most of his madness was an act. The drugs, the drinking, the self-destruction, they weren't just bad habits. They were weapons he turned on himself, threat of losing him. She had shaken him, shouted at him, slapped his face, anything to pull him back. When his eyes finally focused on her, he whispered something she'd never forget. Don't give up on me, Shaz. She didn't, even when she should have. Even when her friends told her to leave. When her father warned her she was tying herself to a sinking ship, she stayed. And Ozzy, in his own broken way, loved her for it. Their marriage was never the fairy tale people wanted to imagine. It was ugly, loud, passionate, and bruised. They hurt each other. They saved each other. And somehow, through all the storms, they stayed tethered. The reality show years only magnified the madness. Sharon's face became as famous as Ozzy's, but the cameras caught the chaos in all its unfiltered glory. The slurred speech, the bizarre rants, the mess of their household. For millions, it was entertainment. For Sharon, it was a life she had been living for decades. She didn't flinch because it was already her normal. But reading that note now, she thought about the quiet battles no one saw. The nights Ozzy would sit at the edge of the bed, head in his hands, whispering that he hated himself for hurting her again. The way he tried to quit over and over, sometimes making it weeks, months, before falling again. And the rare, tender moments that made her believe in him all over again. The way the bravest thing he ever did. The jewelry box that opened beside her, its contents spilling across the bedspread. Rings he'd worn on stage, a pendant she'd given in the 80s, even a broken watch he swore was lucky. But nothing in that box could match the value of the note. It wasn't gold or diamonds. It was worth more. Sharon closed her eyes and let the memories wash over her. The good, the bad, the reckless, the ridiculous. Loving Ozzy had never been simple. But she had never wanted simple. She wanted him exactly as he was, even when it nearly broke her. And she knew, deep down, that he had loved her the same way. Sharon sat there at the kitchen table long after the ink from Ozzy's old letter had blurred slightly under her thumb. She wasn't crying anymore, at least not in the way people think of crying. This was the quieter kind, the kind that sits heavy in the chest, making it hard to breathe, where the tears dry up but the ache doesn't. Around her, the house felt too big. The ticking of the clock on the far wall sounded like a drumbeat, steady and stubborn, the same rhythm that had been in their life together for decades. The rhythm of waiting, enduring, surviving. Her mind wandered back to those years when Ozzy's chaos wasn't a thing that came and went, but an everyday storm. There were mornings when she'd wake up to the sound of glass shattering somewhere in the house. Days when she'd find him passed out in the garden, still wearing the clothes from the night before. She used to tell herself she could handle it, that she was tougher than most, that she knew the difference between a man she loved and the mess the drugs and alcohol made of him. But there were nights when she'd lock herself in the bathroom, sit on the cold tiles, and wonder if loving someone meant you had to let them tear themselves apart in front of you. The public thought they knew it all. They saw the headlines of a reality show, the sound bites of Sharon roll her eyes at Ozzy's antics, and thought it was all just part of the act. But they didn't see the night she'd have to lift his head, so he wouldn't choke in his sleep. They didn't hear the way he'd apologize in half sentences, voice cracked and eyes downcast, before doing it all over again the next week. And yet, and this was a part she could never explain to anyone who hadn't lived it, there were moments of pure, unshakable tenderness. Moments when he'd hold her hand in a crowded room like he was afraid she'd disappear. Moments when he'd mutter something that made no sense to anyone else, but was perfect to her because it was their language, born from years of surviving side by side. Sharon's fingers traced the edge of the letter again. In his messy scrawl, he'd managed to put down things he'd never said out loud. There was a line that stood out more than the rest, one that was both an admission and a promise. I know I gave you hell, Shaz, but you're the only bit of heaven I ever had. It wasn't Shakespeare. It wasn't neat, but it was him. And it hit her harder than anything else he could have written. She thought about the early days, when they were young and foolish, when her father had warned her against marrying a man like Ozzy. She'd been stubborn then, determined to prove she could handle him, that she could be the one to steady his life. She hadn't been wrong, but she hadn't been prepared for just how much of herself she'd have to give away in the process. She remembered the tours, the hotel rooms that smelled like stale smoke and spilled beer, the parade of faces that came and went around him. Sharon had learned early on that being Ozzy's anchor meant standing still while he drifted in and out like the tide. And she had, for years, for decades. And yet, here in this quiet kitchen, holding this decades-old note, she realized that in all the madness, he'd been watching her too, seeing her strength, noticing her sacrifices, maybe not saying it when she needed to hear it, but feeling enough to write it down, however clumsily. Upstairs, the sound of floorboard creaked, just the house settling, but it made her think of him walking in, sheepish and grinning, pretending he hadn't just done something reckless. She smiled despite herself. That was the thing about Ozzy. You could be furious with him. You could swear you'd reach your limit, and then he'd do something so absurd or so unexpectedly sweet that you'd remember exactly why you stayed. The rest of the day passed in that strange, bittersweet haze. She made tea, sat in the living room, and let her eyes wander over photographs lining the walls, snapshots of chaos, laughter, exhaustion, and love. And for the first time in a long while, she let herself admit that the story of her life wasn't one of surviving Ozzy Osbourne. It was one of loving him, deeply, maddeningly, imperfectly, and being loved in return in the only way he knew how. That night, she tucked the note back into the jewelry box, but not in its old place. This time, she put it right at the top, where she could find it again easily, because it wasn't just a relic from their past anymore. It was proof, messy, wrinkled, and written in uneven lines, that through all the storms, there had always been a core of something unbreakable between them. And that, she thought as she turned off the kitchen light, was worth more than any piece of jewelry the box could hold.